Most lights at Harvard went dark by midnight, but that night at 2 a.m., one stubborn light stayed on, and what a professor found behind that door would change 2 lives forever. Harvard had its own kind of silence at night. The ancient brick buildings, the heavy oak doors, the sprawling courtyards, it all seemed to breathe slower once the sun dipped below the horizon. At midnight, the campus fell into a solemn hush, broken only by the occasional rustle of wind or the soft click of a security guard's shoes on stone paths. But on this night, at 2 a.m., there was one small rebellion against the darkness. A sliver of light leaked into the empty corridor, thin and stubborn. Professor Marcus Aldridge almost missed it. He had stayed late, grading papers in his cramped office tucked away behind the main lecture halls. The building was supposed to be empty by now, shuttered, dark, asleep like the rest of the city. He had already packed his briefcase, thrown on his coat, and begun his slow walk toward the exit. But that light, that stubborn little light, it caught the corner of his eye, and something about it, something unexplainable, pulled at him. Marcus hesitated. Every logical thought told him to ignore it, to go home, to collapse into bed like any reasonable man would after a 14-hour day. But there was a part of him, the old part, the curious part that had once led him into dusty libraries and late-night study rooms that couldn't turn away. He set his briefcase down against the wall and walked quietly toward the open door. The hall stretched before him, cavernous and shadowed, lined with portraits of scholars long gone. Their painted eyes seemed to follow him as he moved closer to the source of the light. He reached the door and paused. The room inside was one of the older seminar rooms, small, with rows of battered desks and a chalkboard that still bore the ghostly smudges of yesterday's lectures. And there, under the halo of a battered desk lamp, sat a boy. Marcus blinked. Not a student, not someone who had simply lost track of time during study. This was a child, 7, maybe 8 years old, curled over a notebook so tattered that its pages curled at the edges. The boy's head was bowed, his hand moving feverishly across the paper with a short, chewed-up pencil. Beside him, an old backpack sagged open, revealing a few worn books, a cracked water bottle, and a sandwich wrapped carefully in wax paper. The professor's heart squeezed. The boy's jacket was too big for him. The sleeves swallowed his wrists. His sneakers were threadbare, the soles peeling away from the fabric. He wasn't supposed to be here. He belonged in a warm bed somewhere, not in an abandoned classroom at 2 a.m. Marcus stepped closer, careful not to make a sound. Peeking over the boy's shoulder, he saw what was being scribbled into the notebook, sketches, dozens of them, of buildings, bridges, cities. Some were shaky, others surprisingly detailed. They weren't the random doodles of a bored child. These were designs, dreams, plans. Marcus swallowed hard. He knew brilliance when he saw it. But this wasn't just brilliance. It was resilience. It was hope, stretched thin but still burning, refusing to go out. The boy, oblivious to the watchful eyes behind him, continued sketching. Every few moments he would pause, study his work with a critical frown, then erase and redraw, determined to get it right. Marcus didn't have the heart to interrupt. Instead, he leaned against the door frame, folding his arms, and simply watched. Minutes ticked by. The only sounds were the scratch of the pencil against paper and the soft hum of the desk lamp. Eventually, the boy leaned back, stretching his arms over his head. He yawned, big and wide, and blinked blearily at the clock on the wall. And that's when he saw Marcus. For a second, pure fear flashed across the boy's face. He scrambled to close his notebook, hugging it protectively to his chest. "I'm sorry," he gasped. I'm not messing anything up. I just needed a place to sit while my mom's working. Please don't call anyone." Marcus held up his hands gently. "No trouble," he said softly. "You're not in trouble. What's your name?" The boy hesitated, clutching his notebook tighter. Then, in a voice no louder than a whisper, he said, "Eli?" "Eli," Marcus repeated, smiling warmly. "Nice to meet you." The boy glanced nervously toward the hallway. "My mom's cleaning upstairs," he mumbled. "She said I could sit here, if I was quiet." Marcus nodded slowly, understanding dawning. The cleaning staff, the unseen, tireless workers who kept Harvard's grand halls polished and pristine, often brought their children with them during night shifts. It was unofficial but tolerated, especially when childcare was too expensive or unavailable. His chest ached. "How old are you, Eli?" Marcus asked. "7," the boy said. "And a half." Marcus chuckled softly. 7.5, he corrected himself. Eli shifted awkwardly. He kept looking, at the door, as if expecting someone to come marching in and throw him out. Marcus crouched down so they were eye level. "Eli," he said, "you're not doing anything wrong. You're studying. That's more than most people do at 2 a.m. The boy's eyes, big, brown, earnest, searched his face for any sign of sarcasm or anger. Finding none, he relaxed just a little. "What are you working on?" Marcus asked, nodding toward the notebook. Eli hesitated. Then, shyly, he opened it. Page after page of designs spilled out, cities with green parks, tall, slender buildings reaching for the sky, bridges that curved like ribbons across rivers. Marcus's breath caught. "These are incredible," he said honestly. Eli flushed, ducking his head. "I want to build places someday," he mumbled. "Places where everyone has somewhere safe to sleep." Marcus felt something in his chest crack open. 7 years old, sitting alone in the dark, dreaming not just of grand structures, but of hope. He swallowed past the lump in his throat. "That's a beautiful dream," Marcus said. Eli offered a small, tentative smile. Behind them, down the long hallway, came the faint sound of a mop bucket squeaking against the floor. Eli stiffened. "My mom's coming," he whispered. Marcus stood, giving the boy a reassuring wink. "I should get going anyway," he said. "Late night for both of us." Eli nodded, hurriedly packing his notebook into his battered backpack. Marcus hesitated at the door. "Eli," he said, turning back. The boy looked up, clutching the straps of his backpack tightly. "Don't stop drawing," Marcus said. "Whatever happens, keep building." Eli's smile widened. Small, but real, and in that tiny, golden-lit room at Harvard, under the watchful eyes of centuries-old portraits, a promise was made between a weary professor and a boy who refused to give up dreaming. Marcus walked away into the night, but he carried something with him he hadn't expected. The weight of a new hope, fragile but fiercely alive. And somewhere deep inside, he knew. This wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. Marcus Aldridge barely slept that night. Even after he left the campus, even after the cold air slapped against his face as he walked across the empty courtyard, even after he pulled his old Volvo into the narrow driveway of his modest house. The image of the boy haunted him. Eli, 7.5 years old, sitting alone in the hollow belly of Harvard's ancient walls, sketching dreams too big for the room that tried to contain them. Marcus dropped his keys into the bowl by the door and sank into the worn armchair by the fireplace. The house was silent, save for the soft creak of old floorboards settling into the night. He stared into the dark, wide awake. There had been many nights during his long career when Marcus had stayed up late, grading papers, chasing research grants, worrying about lectures. But never like this. This wasn't about work. This was about a boy who had no business being left out in the cold edges of a world that should have opened its arms to him. A boy with a backpack held together by tape. A boy who dared to dream of bridges and cities when he barely had shoes that fit. Marcus leaned his head back and closed his eyes. He thought of all the speeches he had given to his students, about excellence, perseverance, innovation. How hollow those words must sound to a child like Eli, who didn't have the luxury of safety or time or mentors, who had no scholarship application forms on his desk, no recommendation letters waiting in line, just a pencil, a worn notebook, and the stubborn fire in his chest. And yet, Eli had something else, something too many people with all the advantages in the world had lost. Hope. Raw, unfiltered, almost reckless hope. Marcus opened his eyes. Maybe it wasn't his place. Maybe the system wasn't built to notice boys like Eli. Maybe the world would march on without blinking, letting kids like him slip through the cracks, fall into silence, vanish without a trace. But maybe it only took one person noticing, one person saying, "I see you." Marcus sat forward, his heart pounding strangely. He couldn't fix everything. He couldn't rewrite the rules overnight, but he could start somewhere, with one boy, with one stubborn light that refused to go out. He rose from his chair, grabbed a notepad from the side table, and scribbled down a name. Eli. It wasn't much, just a name, trembling under the weight of too many emotions. But to Marcus, it felt like a promise. The next morning, Marcus arrived at Harvard earlier than he had in years. The sun was barely a smear of gold against the horizon as he walked across the dewy grass toward the administrative offices. The few staff members milling around gave him polite nods, surprised to see the professor moving with such determined urgency. He bypassed his office, bypassed the coffee he desperately needed, and made his way directly to the facilities department. The woman at the front desk looked up from her computer. "Good morning, Professor Aldridge," she said pleasantly. "Good morning," Marcus replied, offering a tight smile. "I need some information about the janitorial staff working last night." She blinked, confused. We don't usually—" "I know it's unusual," Marcus said, softening his tone. "But I'm looking for a particular person, a woman who was working late, with a young son." The woman tapped at her keyboard, scrolling through the schedule. After a moment, she nodded. "Looks like Maria Solis was on shift in your building last night. She's one of our evening crew." Maria Solis. Marcus memorized the name instantly. "Does she happen to be in this morning?" he asked. The woman shook her head. "No, sir. The night shift won't clock in again until 5 p.m. Marcus hesitated. He didn't want to cause trouble for Maria. He didn't want to draw attention that could backfire on her, or worse, on Eli. He simply wanted to help. "Could you let her know I'd like to speak with her when she arrives?" he asked. "No rush. Just let her know a professor would like to thank her. That's all." The woman smiled. "Of course." Marcus nodded his thanks and turned to leave. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Lectures, office hours, emails, meetings. He moved through it all mechanically, his mind never straying far from that stubborn pool of light he had seen burning in the darkness the night before. He wondered about Eli. Was he in school today, yawning through math lessons after staying up so late? Was he doodling bridges in the margins of his notebooks, dreaming of cities where everyone had a home? He wondered about Maria Solis. How many nights had she brought her son along because there was no other choice? How many silent sacrifices had she made, unseen and unthanked, just to keep the lights on? By the time the clock ticked toward 5 p.m., Marcus found himself standing outside the facility's office again, heart pounding like he was a student about to give a presentation. The door swung open, and a small woman in a faded navy uniform stepped out, pushing a mop bucket ahead of her. She looked tired. Not in the way that a late night makes you tired, but in the way that years of hard choices carve exhaustion into your bones. Maria. Marcus cleared his throat gently. "Excuse me, are you Maria Solis?" She turned, startled, gripping the mop handle instinctively. "Yes," she said cautiously. Marcus offered his most disarming smile. "My name is Marcus Aldridge. I'm a professor here. I just wanted to say thank you." She frowned in confusion. "Thank you for what? For raising a boy with dreams bigger than these walls?" He said simply. Maria's eyes widened. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, her expression torn between confusion and fear. "I'm not trying to get anyone in trouble," Marcus hurried to explain. "I saw your son last night. He was sitting quietly, studying while you worked. And I just wanted you to know that he's remarkable." Maria's shoulders sagged slightly, as if she had been carrying the weight of the world and had just been offered a moment's rest. "Eli is," she began, her voice cracking. "He's all I have. I bring him here because I can't leave him alone at home. It's not safe. We don't live in a good area. And I can't afford childcare." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I told him to stay out of the way. I told him to be invisible." Marcus shook his head. "He wasn't invisible," he said softly. "He was brilliant." Maria's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Marcus hesitated, choosing his next words carefully. "I'd like to help," he said. "I don't know exactly how yet, but Eli deserves a chance to be seen, to be nurtured." Maria stared at him, torn between hope and suspicion. "I don't want charity," she whispered. Marcus smiled gently. "It's not charity," he said. "It's investment in a future that deserves to shine." Maria pressed a hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. Marcus didn't push. He simply handed her a small card with his office number scribbled on it. "If you ever want to talk," he said, "my door's always open." And then he walked away, leaving Maria clutching the card like a lifeline. That night, Marcus sat in his armchair again. This time, he wasn't haunted. This time, he was planning. He didn't have all the answers yet, but he knew one thing for certain. A boy named Eli had a light inside him, and Marcus would do whatever he could to keep that light burning. Marcus Aldridge had always believed in the power of small beginnings. He had seen it in his students, the ones who arrived timid and uncertain, who stumbled through their first lectures, only to rise slowly, steadily, into voices that would one day move nations. He had seen it in himself long ago, a boy from a small town with nothing but a scholarship and a stubborn refusal to quit. But never had he seen it as clearly, as fiercely, as he saw it now in a 7-year-old boy with a battered backpack and dreams scribbled into the margins of a tattered notebook. Eli. A name Marcus now carried with him, tucked somewhere behind every thought, every plan. The next morning, Marcus sat in his office, a cup of cold coffee forgotten on the edge of his desk. His laptop glowed faintly, emails piling up unanswered. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. He wasn't sure how to begin. He didn't want to embarrass Maria Solis. He didn't want to put Eli in a spotlight he wasn't ready for. Children like Eli needed protection, not parades. What he wanted was simple, yet enormous. A door. A door that had always been closed to kids like Eli, and he wanted to find a way to open it, quietly, respectfully, without drawing fire. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. Harvard had scholarships. Harvard had grants. But none of them were designed for a boy who wasn't even old enough to apply yet, whose only sin was being born on the wrong side of opportunity. He needed something different, something more human than forms and signatures. Marcus tapped his fingers against the desk. Then, slowly, an idea began to take shape. It started with a call to an old friend, Dr. Evelyn Hart, the director of a local after-school program partnered loosely with the university. A place where bright, underserved kids could receive tutoring, mentorship, and sometimes the simple gift of someone believing in them. Marcus explained carefully, leaving Eli's name out for now, shielding him in the only way he could. "I have a student," he said, because in his heart that's what Eli already was, who could use a bridge, someone to meet him halfway before the system demands he jump farther than he can reach. Evelyn listened, thoughtful. "You've never asked me for a favor like this," she said after a moment. "No," Marcus agreed, "and I won't again." There was a pause. Then, "Bring him by." Relief flooded Marcus so strongly he had to grip the edge of his desk. "Thank you," he whispered. That afternoon, as the sun spilled gold across Harvard's red brick and ivy walls, Marcus found himself standing once again near the facilities department, waiting. Maria Solis arrived just after 5, pushing the same mop bucket, her shoulders squared as if bracing for battle. When she saw Marcus, she hesitated, wary. He approached slowly, hands in his coat pockets. "Maria," he said gently, "I have an idea, one that might help Eli, if you're willing." She studied him, guarded. "What kind of idea?" Marcus explained carefully, about the after-school program, about the scholarship opportunities that could come later, about building a foundation now before it was too late. "He wouldn't have to leave school," Marcus said. "He wouldn't lose anything. He would just gain a little more. A few more tools for the dreams he's already drawing." Maria listened, silent. When he finished, she said nothing for a long time. Marcus forced himself to stand still to give her space. Finally, Maria spoke, her voice low and fierce. "He's a good boy," she said. "He's smart, smarter than me, smarter than most." Marcus smiled. "I know," he said simply. Maria bit her lip, torn between fear and longing. "What if it makes things harder for him?" she whispered. "What if people start looking at him differently? Like he doesn't belong?" Marcus's smile softened. "Maria," he said, "Eli already belongs. We're just making sure the doors don't close before he has a chance to walk through them." Maria looked down at her hands, rough and cracked from years of cleaning floors that would never bear her name. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. Marcus exhaled, the tension in his chest easing. He handed her a simple sheet of paper with the program's address and a time. "Whenever you're ready," he said. "No pressure, no strings." Maria took the paper as if it were made of glass. Marcus nodded once, then stepped back, letting her return to her work without further disruption. As he walked away, a quiet certainty bloomed in his chest. This was how change began, not with grand speeches, not with sweeping legislation, but with a single boy, a single stubborn light, and someone willing to shield it from the wind. That night, Marcus returned home exhausted, but different. The world hadn't shifted. The great machinery of Harvard and the world beyond it still churned as always. But somewhere tucked away in a corner of that ancient university, a small crack had been made in the walls, a crack wide enough for one boy's dream to slip through. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. For now. The building wasn't grand. It didn't have the polished marble floors or the high vaulted ceilings of Harvard's ancient halls. The walls were simple, the floors scuffed, the chairs mismatched and a little wobbly. But to Eli, standing at the entrance with his tattered backpack and wide, uncertain eyes, it might as well have been a palace. His mother knelt beside him, smoothing down his hair with a trembling hand. "You'll be fine, mijo," she whispered in Spanish, her voice thick. "Just be yourself. Just do your best." Eli nodded, clutching the strap of his backpack so tightly his knuckles turned white. Marcus Aldridge stood a few feet away, giving them space. He watched Eli carefully, the way the boy's shoulders tightened, the way he bounced slightly on the balls of his feet, torn between excitement and terror. He knew that feeling. The sense of standing at the edge of something enormous, knowing one wrong step could send you falling. But Eli didn't fall. He squared his tiny shoulders, took a deep breath that seemed almost too big for his small chest, and walked through the door. Inside, the after-school program buzzed with quiet energy. Children of all ages hunched over tables covered in worksheets, sketch pads, battered laptops. Mentors moved from group to group, offering gentle corrections, encouragement, the occasional high five. At first, Eli hovered by the door, overwhelmed. He didn't know where to sit. He didn't know if he belonged. And then a woman with curly gray hair and a bright purple scarf spotted him. "You must be Eli," she said warmly, bending down to his level. Eli nodded, his voice stuck somewhere between his heart and his throat. "I'm Dr. Hart," she said. "You can call me Evelyn. We're very glad you're here." She led him to a small table near the window, where a boy about his age was sketching something on a giant piece of paper, a park with winding trails and little trees drawn in green crayon. Eli's eyes lit up. Dr. Hart smiled. "You two have a lot in common, I think," she said. She handed Eli a stack of blank paper, a pencil sharper than any he had used in months, and a set of colored pencils so bright they looked almost magical. "Go ahead," she said. "Show me your world." At first, Eli drew cautiously. Small houses, simple bridges. But as the minutes passed, and no one laughed, no one took the pencil away, no one told him he didn't belong, his lines grew bolder. His buildings grew taller. His bridges stretched wider. He forgot to be afraid. By the time his mother peeked through the door 2 hours later, worried he might be lonely or overwhelmed, Eli was sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by a small group of children, explaining, with frantic hand gestures, how his dream city would work. Marcus, watching from a distance, saw Maria press a hand to her mouth. Tears shimmered in her eyes, but her smile was brighter than any sun. For the first time in a long, long while, Maria saw her son not just surviving, but shining. Later that evening, as they walked to the bus stop, Eli chattered nonstop. "And then Ms. Evelyn said I could try building a real model if I want. And there's a kid who knows how to use a 3D printer. And guess what, Mom? They don't even care that my backpack is old. Nobody laughed, and they said my bridges look like real bridges." Maria squeezed his hand tightly, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Eli didn't notice. He was too busy dreaming aloud, building a world bigger than the one they walked through. Back at Harvard, Marcus sat alone in his office, staring out the window at the creeping twilight. He thought about Eli, about the way the boy's face had transformed when someone simply gave him space to exist. He thought about all the others, kids who never got seen, never got a chance. He couldn't save them all. He knew that. But maybe he could save one, and maybe one was enough. For now. He pulled out a fresh notebook and wrote across the first page in neat, careful letters, Eli Solis, Project Hope. He didn't know exactly where the road would lead. He just knew he would walk it alongside that boy for as long as he could, for as long as the light stayed on. It happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon, the kind of rain that blurred the world outside into smears of gray and silver, the kind of rain that made even the oldest stones of Harvard's walls seem to sigh under its weight. Inside the after-school center, however, the air was alive. Dr. Evelyn Hart gathered the children around, her bright scarf clashing cheerfully with the dull weather outside. "I have exciting news," she announced, her eyes twinkling. Eli sat cross-legged near the front, clutching a piece of paper where he had been sketching a playground made of spiraling ramps and hanging gardens. He liked it here now. He liked the way people listened without laughing, the way ideas mattered more than the clothes you wore or the backpack you carried. Still, he hadn't been expecting to hear his name. "Eli Solis," Evelyn said, smiling. "You've been nominated to represent our center in the Junior Dream Builders competition." A ripple of applause and curious whispers spread through the room. Eli blinked. He looked around, half expecting someone to correct her, to say it had been a mistake, but no one did. All he saw were smiles, genuine, warm, encouraging. Evelyn knelt beside him. "It's a contest for young designers," she explained. "You'll get to present one of your projects to real architects and engineers. And if they like your design, they might even offer scholarships for special summer programs." She paused, reading the uncertainty on his small, pinched face. "You don't have to say yes right away," she added kindly. "Think about it. Talk to your mom. We'll support you either way." Eli nodded mutely, his mind already spinning faster than he could catch it. Scholarships, architects, engineers, words that felt like they belonged in another language, spoken in rooms he had never been invited into. That night, Eli sat on the floor of their tiny apartment, knees pulled to his chest. His sketchbook lay unopened beside him. Maria moved quietly around the kitchen, putting together a dinner of canned soup and reheated rice, pretending not to watch him. Finally, she broke the silence. "Mijo," she said softly, "why do you look so sad?" Eli didn't answer at first. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't belong there, Mama." Maria froze, a spoon halfway to a bowl. "What do you mean?" Eli hugged his knees tighter. "They're gonna know," he mumbled. "They're gonna see that I don't have real supplies, that I don't know the right words, that my backpack's ripped and my shoes are wrong." He buried his face in his arms. "They're gonna know I don't belong." Maria crossed the room and sat down beside him. For a moment, she said nothing. She just wrapped her arms around him, pulling him into the warmth of her chest, rocking him gently the way she had when he was smaller. When she finally spoke, her voice was fierce. "Listen to me, Eli Solis," she said. "You belong anywhere your dreams can reach." Eli didn't move. Maria cupped his cheek, making him look at her. "You think those big buildings, those fancy papers, those clean shoes, You think that's what makes someone worthy? She shook her head. No, mijo. What makes you worthy is right here. She tapped his chest lightly over his heart. And no one can take that away from you. Eli's throat burned with the effort not to cry. Maria kissed his forehead, lingering there. You were meant for more than what this world gave you, Eli, she whispered. Don't let anyone make you forget that. The next day, Eli stood outside the center, clutching his sketchbook to his chest, shivering slightly under the cloudy sky. He almost turned around. The door was just a few steps away. He could still leave, still hide, still stay small, safe, invisible. But then he remembered Marcus's voice. Don't stop drawing. Whatever happens, keep building. And his mother's fierce whisper in the dark. You belong anywhere your dreams can reach. He straightened his shoulders. One step, another. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. When Dr. Hart saw him, her smile lit up the room. Welcome back, Eli, she said, as if he had never been gone. She handed him a folder with information about the competition. Dates, times, what to expect. And at the bottom of the packet, clipped carefully, was a voucher. Eli frowned, confused. Dr. Hart leaned down and whispered, A little help from a friend. The voucher was for a brand new sketch set, a sturdy backpack, and enough supplies to last him the whole year. Tears blurred Eli's vision. He clutched the packet tightly. Maybe the world wasn't fair. Maybe doors didn't open easily. But sometimes, if you knocked loud enough, and if someone on the other side was willing to listen, the lock would turn, and the door would creak open. Just enough to step through. The day of the competition dawned clear and bright. For the first time in a week, the rain had stopped, leaving puddles that caught the morning light like tiny mirrors scattered across the streets. Maria braided Eli's hair neatly, smoothing down his best shirt, the only collared one he owned, and packed his battered but clean backpack with his precious sketches. He carried no expensive models, no polished blueprints, just paper, pencils, and a heart full of fragile hope. The competition was held in one of the newer buildings near Harvard's sprawling science campus. Glass walls, polished steel beams, marble floors so shiny Eli could see his own nervous reflection staring back at him. Inside, the room buzzed with children and teenagers from across the state. Some wore crisp uniforms from elite academies. Some rolled in carts with elaborate models, tiny cities complete with electric lights and spinning wind turbines. Eli clutched his folder tighter. He felt small, smaller than he had in a long time. For a moment, the doubts came rushing back. You don't belong here. They'll see right through you. But then, a voice, soft but fierce, whispered from memory. You belong anywhere your dreams can reach. He breathed deeply, feeling the weight of the words settle into his bones, one step at a time. Each participant was given 5 minutes to present. Eli watched as older kids stood confidently before the judges, a panel of architects, engineers, professors, and rattled off technical terms he didn't fully understand. His turn approached too fast. When they called his name, Eli Solis, representing Hope Youth Center. His legs almost forgot how to move, but somehow they carried him forward. He climbed the small stage, his paper in shaking hands. The judges looked at him with polite smiles. Marcus Aldridge sat in the back row, heart pounding harder than Eli's own, hands curled into fists against his knees. He knew what Eli was up against. And he knew that no matter what happened next, the boy had already won something invisible but priceless. He had dared to show up. Eli set his papers carefully on the easel. His drawings weren't fancy. There were no digital prints, no laser-cut models, just pencil sketches, worn at the edges from being handled so often. He cleared his throat. "My project," he began, voice thin but steady, "is called The City of Open Doors." A few murmurs rippled through the room. Eli's hands tightened on the podium. He continued, "In my city, every building has a space for people who need it, not just people who can pay. Everyone." He pointed to his sketch of a park. "Here's a playground where kids in wheelchairs can go without getting stuck. And over here," he flipped to another drawing, "are houses with big front porches because sometimes people need somewhere to sit and talk when they're scared." The judges exchanged glances. Eli pressed on, growing a little bolder. "There's a library that stays open all night, with lights in every corner so nobody's scared to study alone, and a shelter that's not hidden away, but right next to the town square because nobody should feel like they have to hide." His voice shook slightly as he finished. "My city is for everybody who ever thought there wasn't a place for them." Silence. Not the uncomfortable silence of disapproval, not the restless silence of impatience, a silence that held its breath, a silence that listened. One of the judges, an older man with silver hair and kind eyes, leaned forward. "Eli," he said, his voice unusually gentle, "why did you design your city this way?" Eli swallowed hard. He looked down at his worn sneakers, then back up at the rows of adults in suits and ties, and he answered with the only truth he knew. "Because I wanted to build a place where my mom wouldn't have to clean floors at night anymore," he said simply. "A place where she could be safe and proud." There it was, the heart of it all, laid bare without polish, without apology. The kind of truth no amount of money or education could fake. Marcus felt the sting of tears at the back of his eyes, and he wasn't the only one. Around the room, faces softened. Some smiled. Some blinked quickly against a sudden burn of emotion. And in that moment, in that small, bright, breathtaking moment, Eli Solis didn't just belong. He shone. He stepped down from the stage, hands still trembling, heart hammering against his ribs. Maria met him at the bottom, pulling him into a fierce hug. "You did it, mijo," she whispered against his hair. "You spoke your dream into the world." And no matter what the judges decided, no matter how many ribbons or trophies were handed out that day, Eli Solis had already won something far greater. He had made them see him, really see him. Not as a poor boy from nowhere, not as a janitor's son, but as a builder of dreams, a bearer of light. The results weren't announced until late in the afternoon. By then, the sky outside had faded from clear blue to the soft gray of approaching evening, and the once buzzing competition room had settled into a heavy, nervous hush. Eli sat between Maria and Marcus at the back of the room, his small hands twisted tightly in the hem of his shirt. He didn't say much. He didn't have to. His wide brown eyes said it all, hope and fear, tangled together in a knot too big for his small chest. Marcus rested a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. Whatever happened, Eli had already done more than anyone had expected. He had stood up. He had spoken his dream out loud. No panel of judges could take that away from him. At the front of the room, Dr. Evelyn Hart took the stage. Her bright purple scarf fluttered like a banner of defiance against the sea of serious suits. She smiled warmly as she spoke. "Today we've seen incredible imagination," she began, "incredible talent and incredible courage." She glanced briefly toward the back of the room, where Eli sat frozen. "But sometimes," she continued, "the greatest architects are not the ones who design the tallest towers or the flashiest skylines." She paused, letting the silence deepen. "Sometimes," she said, her voice dropping to a soft, intimate hum, "they are the ones who build spaces where every person matters, spaces where hope has a place to live." Marcus felt his throat tighten. Maria reached for Eli's hand, squeezing gently. "And so," Evelyn said, her smile blooming, "we are proud to announce a special award today. The Rising Light Scholarship, given not for technical skill alone, but for vision, heart, and the courage to dream beyond circumstance." She unfolded a sheet of paper. "And the first recipient," she said, "is Eli Solis." For a heartbeat, the world went utterly still. Eli didn't move. He barely breathed. It was as if he thought if he so much as blinked, the dream would vanish. Then Maria gasped, a small, broken sound of wonder, and Marcus rose to his feet, clapping hard enough that the noise cracked through the stunned silence like thunder. Slowly, the rest of the room followed. Applause rolled toward Eli like a wave. Faces turned, smiles bloomed, hands clapped, not out of politeness but out of something warmer, purer, respect. Eli stumbled to his feet, propelled more by instinct than thought. He walked to the front of the room, blinking against the sting in his eyes, feeling like he was floating. Dr. Hart knelt down and handed him a small certificate. Nothing fancy, just a simple piece of thick paper with his name written in neat black ink. But it was more than paper. It was a key to a summer program for young designers at the university, a key to mentorship, supplies, support, a key to rooms he had never dared to imagine himself in. Dr. Hart leaned close as she handed it over. "You belong here," she whispered. And for the first time, Eli believed it. Not because someone said it to be nice, not because someone had to, but because he had stood up, built his dream out of nothing but pencil lines and stubborn hope. And the world had seen it. The world had listened. Later, when the crowd had thinned and the lights had dimmed, Eli stood on the steps outside the building, clutching the certificate against his chest. Maria stood beside him, tears glistening on her cheeks, but her smile was radiant. Marcus joined them quietly, his hands tucked into the pockets of his coat, the evening breeze ruffling his hair. "You did good, kid," he said, voice rough. Eli looked up at him, the city lights reflecting in his wide, wonder-filled eyes. "Thank you," Eli whispered. But Marcus shook his head. "No," he said. "Thank you for reminding all of us why we build things in the first place." They stood there for a long moment, watching the night stretch out before them. Above them, the stars began to pierce through the thinning clouds, tiny, stubborn lights against a dark sky. And for the first time in a long time, Eli Solis didn't just dream of open doors. He stood before one, and this time he had the key.